Here's the second question for you. Are you asking about success rates? And if so, what are you considering as reasonable and realistic rates of grant writing success? Something to consider. Every single grant is different. Every single grant application is different. Some are online, fill in the blanks, answer a few stated questions, while others require extensive research, multiple sources, multifaceted budgeting, and stage submissions. Be careful when asking what percent of applications have been written versus funded. Again, I'll say it again, be very careful. Qualify your questions. Percentages can be deceiving. 1 of 2 is 50%. 50 of 100 is also 50%. So if someone just gives you 50%, oh, I have about 50% of my applications funded, that's not telling you much of anything. You do want to know quantity, but you also want to know the quality, not the quality of the writing, but the quality or that some of the attributes of the funding source. Consider that you have, as I said, some applications are, onesie, twosies. You only have to fill out a form, maybe 3-page form, and then you're done. If an individual has only submitted 2 applications to their local grocery store, talking about quality or attributes, that is completely different than 2 applications submitted to a federal entity, let alone a federal research entity. Submissions for renewal applications, often found with foundations, are typically less intensive than the initial application. And failures are also something you want to consider. Failures are not always based on the writer. Sometimes the capacity of the organization does not align with the organizational or the funding requisites. There's numerous reasons for failure. So before you attribute a specific failure to a writer, ask them some details on some of those types of programs that they have written for, some of the drawbacks that they've come across, and some of the challenges in trying to make what may not otherwise be the most competitive application a little more competitive. Let's see. Also, you want your writer to understand budgeting. Not all writers do. You have some writers that just craft language. When you are writing for a grant application, the language needs to align with the budget. And that's very important that they know how to do that. Again, most legitimate grant writers do know these things, but occasionally when you're out on some of these sites looking for a grant writer, they're just people who know how to write and they write really well, but they don't understand the importance of some of the nuances of grants. So just be careful. Remember, success is not always a percentage. I recall in the beginning stages of my grant writing career, I was trying to determine the best definition of a successful writer. And the programs that I served were strongly grounded on 1 and 2 year cycles. So I was 3 for 3, essentially 100%. I had received a government grant, which is a community development block grant that was fairly competitive. I had also received 2 separate grants from Office Depot. I was working for a local nonprofit organization that at that time had a niche population being children of prisoners. And the social environment at that time was distinctly focused around mentoring programs. Yet later in my career, working in and for government, I prepared numerous applications with different public health interests, yet my success rate had significantly dropped. Foundations were less likely to fund government entities, as were corporate entities not willing to fund, but the need to submit to those organizations was to feed the diversity needs of our funding portfolio. The denials that were received did not play well with my success rates, but had to be accounted for. Remember, your fundamentals of math, 1 of 2 is indeed 50%. But if I am only writing to limited, small dollar, less competitive entities, that 50% number can be misleading and in definite need of explanation. Another thing you ought to consider is the competitiveness of a grant application. When I also was working in public health, my boss came across a grant opportunity that exceeded $1 million or so over a period of 2 years. This was somewhat of a marketing campaign of which we had absolutely zero experience. It was expected that the granting organization would distribute only 2 awards. When we participated in the preemptive conference call, there were roughly 450, actually we were one of more than 450 organizations represented on the call. Despite pleas after the call, of course, to not submit an application, my boss said that we had to do so anyway, and as anticipated, we did not receive the funds. Had our organization had some semblance of experience in that realm, our submission may have been deemed competitive, but in this particular instance, this denial was added to our non-funded rate. We were not equipped nor prepared, we had no experience, and really were not operationally qualified to fulfill this obligation. You know, success requires that a writer can creatively but truthfully fill in the holes. It's called innovation. A savvy writer can fill in the gaps that exist in an organizational plan. Doesn't mean they can make the organization operate, but they can identify gaps in what literature that they have, and they can craft or prepare some language that supplements the void into an opportunity. Limitations exist in every single organization, and seemingly most large-scale applications manage to avail a question or two where the organization has to recognize that they hold a void. This is where your writer can do their thing. Have them, ask them, like you do in a regular job interview, what problems have you seen in organizations or in their literature or in the documentation that is given that you had to create a solution. You had to find an opportunity to close that void and give them an opportunity to respond. Not that this is a requirement, but something worth asking. Have they ever participated as a grant evaluator before? This may avail them, well, it actually does. It avails them opportunity to sit at the opposite end of the writing table and actually dissect other applications. They can tell you what the flaws are. They can tell you what some of the strengths in writing and conveying information are. Often there will be candid insights given as a result of participating in a grant review. Again, it's not a mandate, but it can provide a little bit more insight on the potential of your writer. Question number 3, have you sought out any sources? As a starting point, look into previously funded programs and opportunities. You can do a Google search or go on a specific foundation website and just put in funded grant applications. See what comes up. See what comes up in your domain. So maybe not just funded grant applications. Funded grant applications for children of prisoners. Guarantee you will get a response on who has been potential sources for programs of such and who funds have been given out to. So give it a try. Before you have your meeting with that potential writer, identify at least one funding opportunity that you are interested in going after. Share that information prior to your call or prior to your meeting, and expect the potential writer to have some feedback on the application source you shared. Whether the response is one of identifying with familiarity, didn't get that word out too well, or they're oblivious to it. This is an opportunity for you to glean what they know about the source and to see how much more research they're willing to do on your part. If you are doing an online or a telephonic conference, don't ask, just see if they offer to look up some more information on the granting organization Or can they tell you something about the entity from their own experience? Despite their familiarity, I would expect a brief commentary or even a brainstorming session on how to best begin molding a competitive application. If they do not have any ideas or they don't have any questions to ask of you, then I would really consider moving on to another applicant.